Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here. Hope you had a Merry Christmas and you're enjoying a little downtime between the holidays. I certainly am. But Mar-a-Lago is in full diplomacy mode, and I thought I'd give you a quick take on that meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky that just happened yesterday. The big headline was that Putin had called Trump in advance. The alignment between those two leaders in Trump's talking points with the press seemed pretty evident, with Trump even saying, that Putin is very interested in a strong Ukraine, which certainly does not appear to be the case, and that he understands why Putin refuses a ceasefire. He's been less understanding of any other leader that refuses a ceasefire anywhere else in the world. But of course, the fact that Trump isn't getting what he wants means he either has to be angry or he has to find a way to get along with it. And he's tried various aspects of both. Meanwhile, Zelensky landed in his presidential plane, very different from Putin's landing in Anchorage. There was no red carpet treatment. There were no high-level U.S. dignitaries meeting him at the plane. It's very clear that from Trump's perspective, Ukraine is not an ally. Zelensky is a supplicant. He lacks power. If anything, he's a problem for Trump, that he should consider himself fortunate even to be granted an audience. Very different from the way that Trump feels about Putin or Xi Jinping, for example. And as a consequence, he is trying to use more leverage to get the Ukrainians to the outcome that Trump wants, which is ending the war, or at least a temporary ceasefire that lasts for a while. Ukraine is indeed interested in ending the fighting, and they have said that they would accept a ceasefire without preconditions for many months now, when Trump initially demanded it back in, I think it was around April. But Putin thinks that he can do a lot better by continuing the war, and so far, he's been right. If you think about the last few months, Putin sees very little reason to actually negotiate in good faith. In not negotiating and refusing to change what he knows are unacceptable demands of the Ukrainians, Putin so far has gotten Trump to get tougher on Ukraine, much tougher. And while that's going on, Putin is taking more territory. It's been hard fought, and a lot of Russian soldiers are dying, a lot more than Ukrainian soldiers. But Putin doesn't value those soldiers particularly much. And there's no domestic dissent of any significance, nothing meaningful since the days of that mutiny by the former Wagner leader Prigozhin, but nothing, no political instability in the country. Meanwhile, there is more internal fighting within NATO and between the United States and Europe, which is clearly in Putin's interests. So if you're advising Putin, you're telling him that the strategy is working at relatively low cost. There's more pressure from the United States and from Europe, and it's costing you a lot as the war continues. And the pressure from the US is mostly in terms of less oil being exportable, as the US pressures, in particular, India to take a lot less, and that has worked so far, but not very much else. And by the way, it wasn't clear that that strategy was going to work out so well for Putin a few months ago. It wasn't clear that Trump was going to be so unwilling to ratchet up pressure when he failed at getting the ceasefire that he had demanded and that he had indeed promised so many times when he ran for president. But it turns out that waiting out Trump and showing strength, and also watching other leaders do the same, as we have with Xi Jinping, is a smarter strategy if you've got the patience and the capacity, and Putin certainly does. And indeed, another thing that's worth mentioning is that while this is going on, Russia and China are only getting more aligned. I just saw the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, saying that Russia would support China in any instance if there was military conflict over Taiwan. I haven't seen that statement from the Russians before. I've also seen that it is China's support that is now giving Russia a bigger edge in the drone war that before the Ukrainians had. It's certainly making it much easier for them to scale up their missile production. And, you know, you think about the fact that the US has had big problems with China on supply chain for rare earths and critical minerals. Well, all of those core, really hard to get components for drones and missiles, gallium and germanium and graphite and lithium and antimony, these are the same resources that Ukraine is having a really hard time getting their hands on. European defense firms are having a hard time with, and the Russians, of course, are not. And so they feel pretty good about that as well. Now, from the Ukrainian side, Trump's view is, hey, if I want to end the war and I don't really care about the consequences, I should just push the weaker party, and that is the Ukrainians. So the fact that the Ukrainians are more aligned with the US and the West, that it's a democracy and Russia's a dictatorship, that they're not actually engaging in direct strikes against Russian civilians, while the much more powerful Russians are killing Ukrainian civilians directly and targeting them almost every day. None of that really matters to Trump. What matters to Trump is, how do I end the war and get credit for it? Easiest way to do that is to force the Ukrainians to capitulate. And again, so far, that strategy, while it hasn't been successful, it has borne fruit. The Ukrainians have capitulated to a much greater degree. They are much more willing to accept American terms as demanded by the US and as written by the Russians than they were several months ago. And that certainly is even including the potential for a demilitarized zone and elections in short order. But what the Ukrainians are saying is that to make those things happen, they need a referendum. And to have a referendum, they need security guarantees. And those security guarantees have to be Article 5 like. So they have to be, if Ukraine is attacked on non-occupied territory, then NATO countries, doesn't have to be all of NATO, they're not going to be a member of NATO, that's very clear, would have to come to their defense. That have to be very clear legal triggers. And, you know, would the Ukrainians accept that? You know, coming from Trump, I mean, apparently there has been willingness to accept some of that at face value. Trump is offering 15 years, and Ukraine is saying it needs to be 30 or 40. I kind of think that everybody here should be taking a trip to Silicon Valley and recognizing that life is going to look radically different in terms of the ability of governments to talk about credible security guarantees in 15 years, given where AI is going. But be that as it may, you know, Zelensky's probably thinking about, you know, his legacy and what it means for how long Putin is likely to be alive for and all the rest. But the process is moving forward in terms of what Ukraine is willing to give to accept an end to the war. But the Russians, of course, believe that they can take a lot more militarily, and they're probably right. And so at this point, it's very hard to see, despite all of the progress made with the Ukrainians, that there's any need or willingness for Putin to give an inch. And hopefully I'll be proven wrong in that assessment, but so far it does not appear that way, and it doesn't appear that will be the case anytime soon. And as Trump says, that means we're going to have more months of more fighting and more war, a lot more Russians getting killed than Ukrainians, but senseless, brutal, expensive, devastating violence, and also making the transatlantic relationship weaker as this continues, because the U.S. is increasingly seen by its allies as unreliable. Big problem. And that's where we are. Happy New Year to everyone. I'll talk to you all real soon.